All right, well, welcome back to Apartment Building Wealth Generation System. This is Module 2. There we go, Module number 2 of the 7-module online training program. In Module number 1, we were looking at why apartment buildings and the pros and cons, the language, terminology, etc. In Module number 2, we're going to look at more closely what should you be buying. Purpose-built versus a non-purpose-built, what size of property should you be looking at, and very important, what style and or features should you be buying and or avoiding. In Module 3, we'll talk about where you should be buying, and in Module number 4, how do you actually buy it. Then in Module number 5, we'll analyze a real deal, make an offer in Module number 6, and then once you own that property, what do you do now? So that'll be your transition year in property management. We'll cover all of that in Module number 7. Just want to remind everyone again that we do have an annual live training class. We host it in Ottawa, Ontario every fall, and it includes a live bus tour. What we do is we go out and we actually tour some of our properties so that you can see firsthand and experience exactly what it is I'm looking for to purchase with the building or looking to stay away from. We will also take a look at other properties that are for sale. Obviously, this is subject to availability at the time. If we can walk through them, great. We may even have an opportunity to analyze and make a deal on those properties as well. Also have the opportunity to meet my big deal power team. So we invite in my lawyer to speak about incorporating or not, about structuring the deals for joint venture partners, and he'll share his insight with respect to some of the documents that I use. I also have my insurance broker coming in to speak about the importance of having your property properly insured for fire and other liability risks as well. So then we have the financing. We've got my mortgage agent. Actually, he's not a mortgage agent. He's the representative from First National, which is where I deal directly with First National. I don't go through a mortgage broker. So Daryl will come in and he will speak to the group on behalf of financing for the big deals as well. Now we keep this live workshop into very small numbers, a maximum of 20 students plus guests. You're able to bring your guests for free. We keep it this size simply because of the live bus tour. So we only have the one bus going around, so that's what dictates the size of the group. Your investment for this live training is just $497, and as I said, it includes a guest for free. If you want to re-attend on a second, third, and fourth year, like some students do, then the investment is just $197, and again, you can bring a guest for free. If you want more information about the live workshops, when they're going to be happening, or how to register for them, you can simply contact Jen at info@arcawealthacademy.com. All right, so on with module number 2. We left module number 1 with a homework assignment where you were asked to take a look at 2 different properties and determine what the cost per door is, the gross rent multiplier, cap rate, the value with cap of a 7, etc. All of these values needed to be determined, and you were to input them into the worksheet. The answers are here on this slide, so you can compare your answers with what you got as well. All right, so in module number 2, our learning objectives here are to understand the difference between a purpose-built and a non-purpose-built property. Also to know what the size of building you should be looking for, as well as the features that you should be looking for, and more importantly, avoiding altogether. So here we have a snapshot of 3 different properties. They're all relatively small and they're all rental properties, but they're very unique and different. The first one in the top left is called a purpose-built building. That's the Mowat Avenue in Kingston. This is a 6-plex property, and it was designed and built for the sole purpose and intent of housing rental properties tenants. As opposed to the building on the top right, which is a non-purpose built property. This was originally built as a single family, a very large single family home, and over time somebody decided to convert this property into a triplex. So each floor has a rental unit in it, and it could be a 1 or 2 bedroom unit in each of those floors. It has certain challenges we'll talk about here shortly. Then we have mixed use, meaning that there is some commercial residential and commercial non-residential. So here on the main floor you can see the storefront. That is a commercial non-residential. So you might have a candy store, you might have a convenience store, you might have a gift card store, whatever the case may be in that small space below, or it could be a small restaurant as well. And then up above you'll see the door off to the right. That leads upstairs to 1 or 2 apartments. That's what we call a mixed use property. Now this is the sixplex in Kingston, Ontario. It's a purpose-built property. You can see that it's pretty plain Jane. It was built back in the 60s, and it was built with the intent and purpose to house tenants. The basement, 2 basement units, each have 1 bedroom. The first and second floor each have 2 bedrooms for a grand total of 6 units. There's also on-site laundry services, and there's a gas-fired hot water boiler heating system which provides heat to the entire building. So the heat is included in the rent as well. The individual units have their own meters, so they each pay their own utilities, but the heat is included. Now we purchased this particular property, and approximately a year and a half, almost 2 years later, we decided to sell it. So this is what the property analysis looks like when it came time for us to sell it. We were asking $480,000 for it. We actually ended up selling it for $455,000, and we determined that value, the market value of $456,000, by looking at the income and expenses. So if you take a look at the income column, the top center, you'll see that the gross annual rents are $47,000. We have laundry income as well, and then when we take a 3% vacancy into consideration, that leaves us with a gross effective income of $47,721. Now we have to apply expenses to this property. That there's certain expenses that we cannot avoid, such as property taxes, property insurance, the water and sewer that goes to the property, the heat, which I mentioned is a common hot water heating system, and the electricity for the common areas. The electricity is so low because the individual tenants paid for their own electricity in their units. I then inserted a maintenance cost of $300 per door, which is a little bit on the light side, but for my exercise here, I wanted to keep my expenses low so I could keep my net operating income high. I also didn't insert a management fee. So typically you would put in probably 8% for a property like this, which would work out to $3,775. Now, if we take a look over at the cash flow summary directly to the right, on the right hand side of the page there, you'll see that the net operating income is $31,985. That is the gross income less the expenses that I was showing. The debt service is $22,000, just under $23,000, leaving us with cash flow of $9,019. Well, because we've got that higher net operating income of $31,985, when we apply the 7% cap rate, that gives us the market value of $456,929. However, if we had inserted the management fee at 8% for a $3,700 charge, that would have reduced our net operating income by $3,700, and that would have greatly reduced the market value of that property as well. It would also reduce your cash flow from $9,000 down to just over $5,000. So it's very important to understand, you want to be able to buy a property that can support the management, so that in the event that you are unable to manage the property in the future due to health reasons, or you have to move, or whatever the case, you don't want to sell the property. You want to maintain it, but you want to be able to have enough cash flow to support the management, to hire a management company. So in this case, the property can. However, if I included that management fee in there, as I say, my net operating income would have dropped down, and my cash on cash return would have dropped down to 6.6% from 11.4%. So I wanted my numbers to look better, which is why I excluded the management fee. And this is why in a lot of cases when you're looking at rental properties, you'll see that they will exclude a lot of fees or minimize the fees. Like maintenance fees on a property like this should probably be $500, $600, maybe even $700 per door. Yet I only inserted $300 per door. So that's the way the game works. You need to be aware of that. You need to be educated so that you know what to look for when you're buying the property. Now this particular property we had bought just, as I say, about a year and a half before we actually decided to sell it. And we purchased it for $405,000, sold it for $455,000. So we made a $50,000 profit in that year and a half, plus the cash flow that we realized as well. Now this is a snapshot of a page from Geo Warehouse, which is the land registry information. So every municipality has a land registry office where files are kept, documents are kept. A lot of it is kept online now. The only people who have easy access to this are lawyers and real estate agents and appraisers. The public, the general public, can get access to this through any of those sources, or they can go to the land registry office themselves to access this information. It's good to get this information because in here it gives you some details about the property itself, such as the assessment roll for taxes or the PIN number for legal description. And it also gives you some history for the property as well. With respect to the purpose-built, some of the pros for buying purpose-built, the first one is financing. Many of the lenders prefer purpose-built properties simply because there's fewer challenges and headaches with the property itself. They just simply feel more comfortable with it. There's also condo potential with a purpose-built property because it has been created with a blueprint that is easily converted for a condo conversion. It's also got the services that are going to be separated. Now in this particular case with this property, the heating is common, so that's not conducive for a condo conversion. But if each unit had its own heat source, such as electric baseboard heat, and each unit had its own electric meter, then it would be something that you could consider to condominiumize. However, you need to be careful. Don't just go out and buy a property with the plans or intention of condominiumizing it before you talk to the local municipality, because some municipalities will not allow you to convert the property. You need to have their permission to do so. And the reason why they may not want it converted, they may feel there's a glut of condos available in the market, and or you might be taking good quality rental properties away from potential renters in the market. And that's becoming a big concern. So it all depends on the local stats whether you would be able to do the condo conversion or not. A nice thing about the purpose-built is the services such as your electric, water, and heat are all separated or can be separated. Each unit is a standalone. They're not connected with each other, so you're not going to turn your electric kettle on or your toaster on and fear that you're going to blow a fuse because your neighbor puts their kettle on at the same time. Insurance may be easier to gain as well as cheaper, more affordable as well. Again, because it's purpose-built, there's lower risk from the insurance perspective. The design is designed as a purpose-built, therefore it's much more functional. The layout's going to be more practical. There should be more and better safety, fire safety concerns taken care of, such as fire separation between units, either through the walls or the ceilings. You'd also have better sound separation as well than if you just have a house that's converted. It's also more appealing to tenants as a home because they know that it's being purpose-built. It's going to have a better layout, better quality of construction as well, and the maintenance and repairs should be lower. Some of the cons with the purpose-built is supply and demand is a big one. There's lots of demand for these properties, both from an investor's perspective to buy them and also from a tenant's perspective to rent from them. However, the challenge is there's not a lot of these properties available out there, and when they do become available on the market, they usually sell for more than what I believe they're truly worth. Another challenge is the cost to build these properties is too high for the market rents that you're going to achieve. There are some markets such as Vancouver and Toronto potentially where you can get much higher market rent, which can justify the higher cost to build. But generally speaking, it doesn't make sense to build these days. Therefore, there's a continued high demand, and there's no new supply coming into the rental pool. Another con is they can look very commercial, especially back, the properties that were built in the 60s and 70s had a very plain Jane appearance to them. They weren't looking to make anything aesthetically pleasing. They were making it for practical purposes. So it can be a little bit more institutionalized look. Also, the age of these buildings, they're getting up there. Most of these buildings were built in the 50s and 60s, or 60s and 70s rather, sorry. And as a result, they're now entering 50, 60, 70 years of age and starting to need major capital improvements. They should have already had a new roof installed at least once during that time period, but a lot of the windows could be original, and that could be additional cost for you to have to incur. Some of the plumbing could be outdated and start causing leaks, so you need to be aware of that as well. Now we take a look at a non-purpose built property. So we got this little beauty here. It's a fourplex. Now that was originally built as a single family house, and it looks like there was an addition built on to the right hand side and perhaps at the back there as well. The price for these types of properties is typically a little bit lower than your purpose built because a lot of people are able to purchase the property originally in its original condition at a lower price point and then do the conversion. So therefore there's usually a little bit less of your cash involved, and it's just going to cash flow better for you as well. It's also at that lower price point, it's an easier property for you to get into the game of investing. Sometimes there can be some wonderful character, like in that first couple slides back there. That first non-purpose built building was a Victorian style house. It has a little bit of character and looks nice from the outside, but more often than not they can get pretty tired, run down, drab looking. Like this one in the picture is not too bad, but it's nothing exciting to get to look at. There's lots of new conversion opportunities out there today. A lot of schools are being shut down because the population shift in the communities. A lot of churches, church attendance has been slumping over the years, and as a result, a lot of churches are closing. I know in a neighboring town to me here, an investor just bought an old church, and he is converting that into either 6 or 8 apartments. I can't remember which. But it's in a very good location. It's a good solid stone building. It's going to last for another 100 years easily. Another thing about these types of properties is they typically are scattered throughout the residential neighborhood, so you don't feel like you're living in a rental neighborhood. You could have nice single family homes all around you, and it just has a nicer feel to it. Supply and demand is an issue here as well. Many larger homes and too big for today's lifestyle are being converted into several rentals as well. Now the cons with these is that there's potentially higher maintenance costs because your plumbing and electrical have not been laid out properly. It's a bit of a haphazard or a dog's breakfast in a lot of these types of properties. And unfortunately, a lot of these conversions have been done without proper permits or inspections, or they could have been done back when the building code wasn't as strict as it is today. So you need to be aware of that and make sure that you have a very good building inspector inspect that property and make sure there's no major issues. Another big con is they're not functionally designed very well at all. So you could have a set of narrow stairs with a low ceiling going upstairs because that's just the way old buildings used to be built, which makes it very difficult for moving furniture upstairs. You could have smaller than normal rooms, just impractical, or you could have a new investor cutting up the floor plan and making stupid small rooms and just impractical layouts as well. Another big concern, and this is a huge one actually, is your fire code and safety. You want to make sure that whatever the property is you purchase, you make sure it's safe for your tenants, because ultimately you are responsible for their safety. So you want to make sure that you've got good working fire, smoke detector and carbon monoxide detector alarms hardwired throughout the house. And you want to make sure that egress is simple and safe, so proper size windows, proper size doors, not overcrowding, not creating rooms without windows, etc. Noise transition can be a major issue in these types of properties as well, because again, they weren't built with the intent of housing multiple tenants. So you don't have insulation in between floor joists, you don't have insulation on interior walls between units. So unless there was a major retrofit done, you can expect the noise between units to be pretty significant. It also tends to attract or be more appealing to your lower quality tenants. It's not necessarily viewed as a home, it's just a place to put their heads down and sleep. You could potentially be attracting more transient. And again, this is a very broad general statement, because there are some beautiful non-purpose built buildings that have been converted. But generally speaking, these types of buildings have been renovated poorly, managed poorly, maintained poorly, and for all of those reasons they attract less quality tenants and or less desirable tenants, so you just need to be aware of that. Financing can be an issue. The lenders don't like non-purpose built as much as they do purpose built. They still will finance them, just a little bit more of a challenge. And when it's under 4 units or less, then you're going to be looking at your conventional residential mortgages that you get from your local banks. As soon as you get into 5 units or more, like the unit to the bottom right, it's not a huge difference, only one unit more, yet the issue here is the financing, because the lenders are for the residential are going to say, no, we don't do 5-unit buildings, we only do 4 and smaller. And then the big commercial lenders are going to say, well, yeah, that's a commercial building, but we don't do little deals like that. We only do 500,000 plus deals. So these I'm going to say between 5 and 8 units can be a bit of a challenge to finance, just simply because of their size, could be their location, could be the rental income they're generating. So you need to be aware of that. Yeah, quite simply, just too small for the commercial lenders to make it worth their while. Then we take a look at mixed use. So here we have an example of a house that somebody has built a small commercial space to the front of it, and it looks like it's a singer's sewing shop here right now. But other examples of this could be a lawyer working from home and creating office space on the main floor. Quite often you'll see dentists opening up in old houses as well, or optometrists, professionals who are looking to get out of the conventional commercial and get out of the downtown core, perhaps into a more quiet residential area. If they do this and they open up a commercial space, then that is now a mixed use building. So in this particular case, that looks big enough that you probably have 1 or 2 units upstairs, maybe even a 3rd unit downstairs. Actually, it says there's 4 units in there, plus the 1 commercial space at the front. Now, the nice thing about having commercial space is that the rents are usually higher than residential, and they're more inclusive, meaning that the tenant for the commercial space has to take care of their own utilities. They may even have to pay a portion of the property taxes, the snow clearing, etc. So that's good. It also creates some diversity, so you're not relying 100% on tenants, residential tenants, but there are some flip sides to that as well. Commercial is usually easier to manage as well. You don't have to follow the same rules and regulations when you're managing commercial tenants versus residential tenants. So if they don't pay their rent on the 1st of the month, you can technically go and lock the door, change the locks, and you are well within your rights. You can't do that with a residential unit. There's also the opportunity to take advantage of local incentives. So, for example, I have one student right now who is investing in a small town, and he's taking mixed-use commercial and switching it to 100% residential simply because there's not enough commercial traffic or industry in the downtown core any longer. So what they're doing is they're allowing the owners to convert it over to residential. Now, not every municipality will allow you to do this because they want to maintain commercial space in the downtown cores usually. However, they will have beautification money set aside or money to help you do these conversions. Not every municipality, but in many cases they do. And I know that, for example, my student, I believe he picked up $60,000 to help him do major renovations and conversion on a property that he's probably spent about $120,000 on that property. So to have 50% of your costs covered by the municipality is a bonus. Now, some of the cons with mixed use. Not many people want to be living above a convenience store or a bar or a restaurant, especially a bar or restaurant, because it can get quite noisy in the evenings, and then there's the risk of fires from the kitchens. So it's not all that appealing. So it's a harder property to attract good quality tenants to. There's also no insured financing available with mixed commercial. The only time that you're going to get insured financing for commercial properties is if it's almost 100% commercial residential. Also, commercial units, as good as they are when they're full, they can be horrific when they're empty because they can be more difficult to rent than just a conventional two-bedroom apartment. It has to, suit the needs of the potential tenant, and then depending on the condition and location, they're going to have to spend some money to renovate this as well. So it's a lot more difficult typically to get good quality commercial tenants in, but when you do, the cash flow is significantly better. So you need to be clear that you should be focusing on purpose-built apartment buildings initially. So now let's take a look at the size that you should be looking at. So here we have two examples of two pictures of two properties. These are actually some of my properties. These are 2 to 4 units, so both of these actually are duplexes. The top picture is a side-by-side duplex, 3 bedrooms each side. The bottom one is an up-down duplex. Each unit is 1 bedroom. The nice thing about these buildings is that they're less expensive, therefore require a much smaller down payment. They're residential. They're not commercial, so you can get your regular residential mortgage for them. They're a lot easier to find simply because there's more of them out there in the marketplace as well. Residential financing is a huge bonus simply because you get flexible rates, you get flexible terms as well. This is a great first step for beginners, mainly because not only is it easier to get into, it's the exact same steps to buy either of these duplexes as it would be to buy a 30-unit apartment building. It's just more zeros rather, with the apartment building. But it's the same process, the same steps. So it's not a matter of if you're going to make a mistake, it's a matter of when you make a mistake. You want to make sure your mistake doesn't cost you a fortune. So starting out small like this is strongly suggested because when you make a mistake, it's very easy and much more manageable to recover from. The cons of doing these types of units is, well, the residential financing. You, the buyer, must qualify. So it all depends on where you're at within your investing portfolio. I mean, if you already have 6 mortgages, you may not be able to qualify for any more residential mortgages. Therefore, it's going to be difficult for you to buy either of these properties. Owning many small properties is similar to owning a bunch of single-family homes spread all over the place. So you've got the scale of economy issue. So in this particular case, I've got 4 units, but I've got 2 roofs and 4 furnaces, 4 fridges, 4 of everything. So it's just a little bit more difficult to manage. Also, property management is likely to be more expensive as well. Property management companies tend to charge a little bit more for smaller units just because, again, it's called scale of economy. I mean, if there's 6 duplexes, that's 12 rentals. So you got 6 duplexes versus one 12-unit building, it's much easier for the property manager to go to that one building and manage that one building on one location versus running all over the town or the city, municipality to all of the other 6 units as well. Then we move up into what I call the medium size, and we'll say from 5 to 30 units. Now that's a picture of my property. There's actually a second one off to the right. You can just barely see it through the trees there. So there's 2 buildings there for a total of 22 units. The pros to this type of building is that they're mostly purpose-built. It's very rare that you're going to see a 30-unit property that has been converted, unless, for example, it's a school. But even if it's a school or a church, something of that size, there will be major renovations to almost make it the effect of purpose-built. They're easy to self-manage as well, so it's still not beyond your scope of being able to manage this. And the nice thing about this that I like is that it's commercial financing. Therefore, I don't have to qualify. I still have to go on the mortgage and with the title being on the property, but I don't have to personally qualify as long as I've got good credit and a net worth of over $100,000. The cons of these types of properties, they're too small for an on-site superintendent. Now, I do have a superintendent that lives in this property, but he takes care of this property and another property just down the street for me. So there's enough units between the 2 properties to justify one on-site super, but he has to travel back and forth between the 2 properties. If you just have the 22 units, there's not enough cash flow to justify a full-time on-site superintendent. You may want to employ the services of somebody part-time on-site to help you out, especially if you live a good distance away. There are also fewer available for sale as well. So again, these have been built primarily in the 60s and the 70s, a few older ones in the 50s, but 60s and 70s were when most of them were built. And back then it made sense. The cost of building was lower, and the rents that they could get would justify the cost of building it. That's not the case today. So there's fewer properties being built, but there's more tenants every year. So when a property like this becomes available on the market, it usually sells very, very quickly. Most of them are older, like I mentioned, in the 60s and 70s, which means that they're going to start to experience the need for capital improvements as well. And some of the features, like the hallways, are going to be very dated. Some things you can change, some things you can't. These are much more expensive than your 4 units and lower. Therefore, you're definitely going to need more cash required. And again, I can't say it often enough here, but if you're looking at a unit with 5 to 8 units, you need to be aware that financing could be a challenge, so you want to look into that as quickly as possible. Then we jump into the large properties, and I'm talking 30 plus in size. The pros of buying into properties of this size is simply the scale of economy. If you can have all of your units under one roof, it just makes maintenance and management so much easier. You can now afford on-site managers, so somebody who lives there 24/7, so you're not getting the late night calls. You can also afford more expensive features. So you may have an in-ground pool, you may have underground parking, you may have laundry on every floor, you may have storage lockers in the basement, you might have a common room for games, etc., or an exercise room. These are all things that can be appealing to tenants, and tenants typically in these larger buildings that are more expensive are going to be a little bit more affluent, so they're going to be in your middle income, probably your middle and upper middle income and your lower upper income. The cons with these types of buildings is that they are very expensive for beginners because they simply require huge down payments. So you could be looking at a $20, $25, $30 million acquisition, and if you have to put 20% down, that's $3 or $4 million you're going to have to come up with just for the down payment. So very difficult to get into. It's something to work up to. However, your competition in this market is going to be from your REITs and your pension funds and insurance companies. The REITs are your real estate investment trusts. They're sort of like a mutual fund. except they contain real estate. It's a real estate portfolio. And these funds, whether they be the pensions fund, like a teacher's pension fund, or an insurance company that's looking to park money as well, the key word there is park their money. What they're looking for is not necessarily a growth on their money. They're just looking someplace to keep it that's safe and sound and won't lose value. Because when the stock market crashes, what happens to all of these cash accounts, all these savings accounts rather, all these investments that the REITs are invested in and the pension funds are invested in, they could lose millions and millions of dollars. So what they like to do is diversify and mitigate their risk by investing into these large apartment buildings. They know that they're not going to achieve a high return on their investment, but they're more interested in being able to protect and save the money in the event that there is a market adjustment. So as a result, you get these big guys coming in playing the game that you want to play in, but they're buying these properties at as low as 3.5%, 4% cap rates. And it just doesn't make sense until you get up to 6.5 or 7% cap rate from my perspective. Up around the 7 cap rate is when the property should potentially cash flow well enough to make it worth your while. Down at a 4% cap rate, there's virtually no revenue coming in. There's just enough money to maintain the building, but that's all those investors are looking for, because again, they're just parking their money. So it's my belief that your first property, you should be looking at triplex, fourplex. Keep it in the residential ballpark so that you can qualify for it. It's a great way to start, because when you make a mistake, your mistake isn't going to be magnified. Like if you buy a 30-unit building versus a 3-unit building, your mistakes are going to be much less magnified. The most common size of buildings out there are 10 to 24 units. This is where you ultimately want to go. This is what we call your sweet spot. But again, just be aware of that 5 to 8 unit challenge for financing. So again, not too big, not too small. The best size for us is in the 10 to 30 unit, which is usually a 2.5 story walk-up. Now let's take a look at your style and features of the properties, things that you would like to have and things that you want to stay away from. So we're going to take a look at utilities. We're going to take a look at the heating source, the number of floors in the property, the roof construction, balconies, and parking. First of all, utilities. Typically, you've got your natural gas. It could be oil still, but that's becoming more and more rare. Electricity, water, sewer, could also be cable as well. So the nice thing is when you have individual meters, that way you have the option of downloading those services or the cost for those services directly to the tenant. So you'd like to have the electric meters put in the tenant's name, so while they're there, they're paying those bills. If you want to go inclusive, which I'm sort of on the fence with, some properties I'm inclusive, some I'm not. What I mean by inclusive is that I will include the electricity and the gas charge in the rent and pay it on behalf of the tenant, so the tenant only has to make one payment. The nice thing for the tenant is they only have to make one payment. A lot of tenants, a lot of people in general, are not very good at managing their money. And what you want to make sure happens is that your rent gets paid every month. So the fewer bills for your tenant to pay, the better. Just makes it easier for you to make sure there's enough money at the end of the month to pay your bill. If you're going to go the inclusive rate, actually before I go there, another reason why you may want to consider going inclusive is that it comes back to money management and not understanding or knowing about your credit ratings. Many tenants, I would be willing to guess a minimum of 80%, more likely 90, 95% of tenants, if you were to ask them what their credit score was, they wouldn't even know they had a credit score or what the impact of their credit score was. So these individuals don't realize that they need to manage their credit properly so that they can qualify for an account with the local utility companies. Unfortunately, many tenants are unable to qualify because they don't manage their credit properly. Does that make them a bad tenant? Not at all. It makes them an uneducated tenant. So they can still be a very good tenant. And in a case like that, this might be a situation where you do the all-inclusive. So you pay their electricity, you pay their gas. And what I would do is, if the additional cost for electricity and gas is going to be $100 per month to their unit, then I would charge anywhere from $115 to $120 just to add that little bit of a buffer, because now that they're not paying their electricity bill, they're not going to be as concerned about turning the lights off at night. So that just gives you a little bit of a buffer. Then we've got heating, which can be gas, oil, or electric. With the surging electric costs these days, many tenants don't like electric heating systems. It's not a bad system. It's very cost effective to build and maintain from an investor's perspective, but from the tenant's perspective, it can be quite pricey. So it's not very appealing. The most appealing heat source and the most effective heat source is a gas-fired hot water heating system, which circulates hot water through to all of the units. The challenge here is that you've got one heat source, one heat bill, and it's going to be included in all of the tenants' rent. The common heat source, most efficient in large properties, is the boilers, as I mentioned. I love buying an old, inefficient boiler because what happens there is I can negotiate a better deal when I'm looking at that property and tell them, you know, I'm going to have to invest $10,000, $12,000 for a new boiler, so your building's not worth it. Also, you have to keep in mind that if they've got this old boiler in there, they're paying higher expenses because it's very inefficient. And when I put in a new high efficiency furnace, then what's going to happen is the expenses are going to drop down and the value of the building is going to go up. So I love old boilers when I'm buying properties. And what I typically do is I will negotiate that the seller will replace the boiler with a new high efficiency boiler of my choice prior to taking the property over. So I don't even have to pay it. I'm going to have that as part of the purchase costs. The newer furnaces are also easier to manage and maintain because they have outside temperature sensors now. So they automatically turn on and shut off in the spring and fall. Instead of you having to go over there because the temperature is going to drop below the 10 degrees, so you have to run over and turn the furnace on tonight. The sensors will automatically do this for you. One control, the challenge with having only one control for the entire building is that you're going to have tenants controlling the heat inside their units by simply opening up the windows to let the cooled air come in. So when you're looking at this type of heat source, what you want to have is individual climate control. And what I mean by that is that the heat source is being circulated throughout the building, so as it enters a unit, there will be a valve there that will be automatically shut off or opened based upon a thermostat inside the unit. So the tenant can set their thermostat to 21 degrees Celsius, 70 degrees Fahrenheit, whatever it is they're comfortable at. And when the temperature drops below that, it'll open the valve automatically, allow the hot water to circulate through the unit. As soon as it reaches that certain temperature, it shuts the valve off. So that's an individual climate control. When you have that individual climate control, there's less likelihood that the units are going to get overheated and the tenants are going to be opening up your windows, which drives you, the landlord, absolutely nuts when you drive by the building and you see all these windows on the top floor open and you see all the heat pouring out, and all you see is dollar signs pouring out those windows. The number of floors, when you have more than 3 floors, so 4 or more floors, you're going to require an elevator. Now, there's going to be situations where these will be grandfathered. If it's an old building that was built back in the 60s and it's a 5-story building with no elevators, they will not require you to put an elevator in. However, the challenge is by not having an elevator in, it's going to be extremely difficult to rent, especially floor 4 and 5, just because everybody has to walk up so many more stairs. So elevators are certainly a nice feature to have in a building, especially if you're going to be attracting seniors. We currently have 2 buildings with elevators, and the buildings are senior-only buildings. So they're 55 plus. The pros for this is that it attracts a better quality tenant because you're charging higher rents. It also allows you to become more handicap accessible. So you're not restricting anybody from being a potential tenant there. If they're in a walker or a wheelchair, then they've got access to the entire building. The con about having an elevator is the cost of elevators. They're extremely expensive to maintain, very expensive to install as well. So we knew when we bought this one particular building, it was an older building and it had an older elevator that was at the end of its life cycle, was going to need to be replaced. So we were prepared for that and we budgeted for it. The elevator, which services 4 floors, it's a very small elevator, cost $170,000 to install. So they're not cheap. You have to have annual inspections as well. After 20 years, you have to have them refurbished. And after 40 years, you have to have them replaced. So you're looking at another $170,000 in 40 years' time. The cons of having more than 4 balconies is, or 4 floors rather, they usually have balconies. And I'll talk about balconies in more detail shortly. And the exterior maintenance can be very expensive. So if you have to start doing work to the exterior of the property, you're going to have massive amounts of scaffolding in place, or you're going to have to use cranes. There's also fire safety issues. Now, you have to have multiple fire escapes inside the building in order for tenants to be able to vacate in the event of a fire. However, there have been some cases. Well, unfortunately, there was a very tragic case recently in Great Britain where there was a fire that engulfed the entire building very, very quickly and basically trapped close to 100 people, I believe, inside, and they lost their lives as a result of that, simply because they couldn't get out of the building. And the fire ladders can only reach so far, so there's some huge concerns there as well. What I prefer is the 2.5-story walk-ups. This is a snapshot of my 11-unit apartment building. So as soon as you walk through that front door, you walk up half a flight of stairs or down half a flight of stairs to get to the lower or the first level. So there's no elevator involved here, so much lower expenses. Also very easy for the exterior maintenance. And its lower rents are affordable as well and easy to rent out. The cons with this is that there are stairs. So if you are in a wheelchair or if you're in a walker or anything of that nature, you're definitely going to be forced to deal with the stairs. So there's no elevator, which is going to have a restriction on the clientele that you can have. Now let's talk about balconies. People love to have balconies, and they can be a wonderful feature for a property. They can add a little bit of value to the building with respect to the rent. You might be able to get $50 to $100 a month more if you've got a nice sized balcony on your rental unit, because this is creating some outdoor space for the individuals, which can be very aesthetically pleasing. It's also a great place for people to relax and get fresh air. So those are some of the pros. The cons is the risks and liabilities. You've got the risk of a child climbing over the edge of the balcony, standing on something and getting over the balcony and falling to their death. You have the challenge of barbecues on the balconies and the fire risk that can present. Rot and decay. So these particular balconies here are what we call cantilevered, meaning the support goes deep into the building and they stick out over the open space. So when those supports rot or rust out, then there's the potential for the balcony to fall without much warning. They're also very expensive to repair, and they tend to be a catch-all. As you can see in the pictures here, they're not very aesthetically pleasing when people start storing stuff outside on their balconies. Here's an example of some safety and regulations that you need to be aware of. When you're looking at a balcony, there needs to be a minimum height of 42 inches. So if the balcony railing is less than 42 inches, you're going to have to increase the height of that balcony by adding more onto it or replacing it altogether. You also have to be aware of the spacing between the bars. The maximum is 4 inches, so you don't want little children being able to squeeze through. And this is the cantilevered stress points I was talking about, where those 2x8s or 2x10s protrude through the wall. There's a high potential for rot and damage at that point, so when they do fail, they will fail very quickly. Balcony failures are a major concern. So you can see in the picture in the top right here where a balcony has actually disappeared. There was a situation in the local community of Ottawa, several years ago, in a building similar to this one here, where a balcony failed and there was about 6 or 7 people on the balcony. Maybe it was slightly overloaded, but it should have been able to sustain the weight. However, because there were 6 or 7 people out there, the balcony suddenly let go. It didn't just fall gradually, it fell directly to the floor. Unfortunately, one of the individuals that fell is still in a coma to this day, so there are definite liability risks to that. You also want to make sure that if and when you have these balconies, you protect it from moisture getting into the building. So you can see in the bottom left here, a different way of creating a moisture-proof barrier. So you want to have the water deflect away from the building always. There's that's like a rubber mat that goes over top of your wood deck to run the water off. With respect to roofs, most commercial buildings, commercial residential buildings of 20 units or larger typically have flat roofs. Most of these roofs used to be tar and gravel. In the past 20 years, there's been a huge trend switching over to rubber membrane, which I love. And in some cases, they actually have foam roofs now. But the most common are your tar and gravel and rubber membrane, probably 50-50. There's also the option for a sloped or a pitched roof, which then would require shingles or steel on them as well. So here you got a picture of a flat roof, and the one in the bottom right hand corner is a flat roof that we had installed on our 11-unit apartment building that you saw a few slides back there. That roof cost approximately $25,000 to install, but it's now this nice bright white membrane, so it runs the water off easily. Snow can sit on there, not cause any damage. The sun comes down and reflects off of that, so it reduces the heat in the building in the summertime as well. You can see a tar and gravel model in the top right there, and what there is multiple layers of, you start off with your sheathing, and then you've got tar paper, then you've got tar, then you've got tar paper, tar, multiple layers, and then you finish it off with a layer of tar and some gravel on top of the tar to protect the tar. And this can usually last 20 to 25 years if it's properly maintained. Your rubber membrane, same life expectancy, they say 20 to 25 years, but I see the rubber membrane actually lasting 35, 40 years in a lot of cases. With respect to a pitched roof, asphalt shingles aren't what they used to be. The life expectancy of asphalt shingles is much shorter than, even if they say it's 40 years, you'll be lucky to get 20, 15, or 20 years out of it. It's also more susceptible to the sun and the wind. And of course, if you've got any tree branches or anything of that nature, you want to make sure that that's taken care of. The nice thing about pitched roofs, though, is that they're more aesthetically pleasing, just nicer to look at. They're also more affordable for smaller buildings, smaller roofs. The cons with it is that there could be improper ventilation, which will cause moisture issues in the attic, can create mold in the attic, and ice dams on the outside as well, which creates a water backup and leaking into your house. So you want to make sure that you've got proper ventilation. As you see in the diagram up in the top right here, there's a space. It's a minimum of 25 centimeters, which is about 4 or 5 inches space, which allows the airflow to come up through the soffit, pass between the insulation and the exterior of the roof into the open space of the attic, and then there'll be a vent in the attic to allow the air to escape. So this prevents the roof from getting hot on the inside and cold on the outside, creating moisture issues. You can also have a pitched steel roof. Again, aesthetically pleasing, much more durable than your asphalt shingles. You have a much longer lifespan as well. So my wife Joanne and I were just talking recently about we just moved into a brand new home here 3 years ago, and I suspect that probably in 7 to 10 years we'll need to change the shingles much earlier than they need to be changed. But what we're going to do is we're going to put steel shingles on so that they still look very nice, still look like shingles, but we'll never have to change them again in our lifetime. The cons with doing it is it's much more expensive. It's probably 3 to 4 times more expensive to put a steel roof on versus shingles. You also have an issue with falling snow and ice because the steel roof is very, very slippery. So as snow builds up, it will slide off the roof, especially if you've got a steeper pitch. So you want to make sure that walkways and entrance areas are protected from the falling snow and ice. To be able to put eaves trough on a steel roof is also a challenge because with the sliding snow and ice in the wintertime, it tends to grab the eaves trough and rip it down. So you want to make sure you install that properly. And then again, same thing as with the shingled roof, you want to make sure you have proper ventilation. Parking is always an issue. A lot of people love the idea of underground heated garages. I love the idea of having a nice indoor heated parking area as well. But the reality is it's not good for your vehicles here in the northern cold climates where they put salt on the ground for the wintertime, because when you go from the cold into the hot, that's when the salt really starts to react and rust out your vehicles. However, tenants and renters like underground heated parking. There's also the option for above ground parking garages or surface parking, and you can have covered or exposed, paved or gravel with or without garages. So these are the options. The challenge with the underground heated garage, other than the salt damage, they're nice and comfortable, dry and secure, but they're very, very costly to build. So not only does the salt cause damage to the cars, salt will actually rot the concrete. It'll get through all the small cracks and start to rust out the rebar inside the concrete much prematurely. And the rotting out of the rebar causes, it's sort of like water freezing. As the rust expands, it will start to delaminate the concrete. You need to get in there then, break it all open, expose it, change the rebar, fix it, and resurface it with new concrete. And that is extremely expensive. With above ground parking, it's similar to the below ground parking actually, except there's no heat involved. Still very costly to build and to maintain, and very costly to repair as well, because salt loves above ground as much as it does the heated underground. The challenge is that in some regions, especially in the bigger cities, you have no choice but to go with above ground parking lots. But again, for what we're looking at here in this program, we're looking at smaller apartments. We won't be looking at above ground parking garages. This is my preference, and that's the surface parking. It's the least expensive to maintain and to create. It's also the least desirable from the tenants. Snow removal can be an issue because you have to plow this. It's your responsibility to plow the common areas. So you want to make sure that you've got a large area that you can store the snow in the wintertime. There are much lower maintenance costs though, because you don't have to worry about concrete repairs. There's less security for the tenants, so that's not good from the tenant's perspective. So what you could do is sort of a hybrid where you can offer covered parking, and it also makes good use of the land as well here. So you're not getting into buildings, but you are providing a certain amount of protection for the cars. This is my overall preferred based on the cost and value. Drainage is something you need to be aware of big time with your apartment buildings. This is a picture of my 11-unit building that I bought, actually you can see the date there, in 2004. At the left-hand picture in the bottom, there was major drainage issues here. So they tried to fix it with some patching of the pavement there. You can see they tried to bank up some pavement to get the water to run away. But what was happening was they had one drain pipe for the entire roof, which came down and it drained directly right at the corner. It didn't drain away from the building. It went right onto the ground, and it seeped down through the ground to the left and in behind the pavement to the right and directly into the bedroom of the basement unit right there. So when I first looked at this property, that unit was vacant. It had major water damage, and of course that would be an issue for any potential buyer to buy that property and view, that there's all these major water issues. Now, the proper way to build something and fix something like this is up in the top right hand corner here. You can see where you've got the basement wall. What you want to do is you want to have that tailpipe, the arrow pointing to that tailpipe, going away from the building. So that gets the water away from it. If any water lands around that, it will filter down between and through that dark brown backfill into the gravel, down into, you can see a small circle at the bottom. That's a discharge pipe that runs around the full exterior of the house or the building and then runs away out into the field. That's the proper way to have drainage so the water doesn't get into the basement. Now, in this building here, I don't know that they have proper drain tiles around the building. So I just focus simply on putting the tailpipe on that eaves trough, adding a second eaves trough to the other end of the building to share the water load. We took out the pavement and put in new pavement, changed the surface and the slope, and parged the wall along there, and we no longer have water issues in that unit anymore. Let's take a look at the different classes of building. So a Class A building is generally built within the past 10 years. It's a high-rise product in select central business area. You may be over 20 years of age, but once they get over 20, they start to drop down in class and become A- or a B+. These types of buildings command top rents, and they're well landscaped, they're beautiful. They're great for high-end clients, clubs, etc. They tend to have higher-end exterior finishings and interior amenities as well. So you're going to get a lot of things in these buildings such as swimming pools, games rooms, underground parking, exercise rooms, etc. Your Class B is going to be a building that at one point may have been considered a Class A, but with age, it has gotten a bit tired and run down, so it has slipped into the Class B. It may not have all the amenities of your Class A building as well, so there may not be underground parking, there may not be your exercise rooms. The exterior and interior amenity package is dated and less than what is offered by the properties in the high end. Good quality construction with little deferred maintenance. The commands rents within the range of a Class B in the submarket. So definitely lower rents than your Class A buildings. And it's a market that is a good market to aim for. It's not where you're going to start out though. Class C buildings are getting into your older buildings, generally built 30 to 40 years ago. Very limited dated exterior and interior amenity packages. So these are your plain Jane buildings. You'll see this building here has will not have an elevator. It has no balconies. Definitely starting to show its age. It's not going to command the rents that you can get in a B market, that's for sure. The majority of the appliances are probably still original and need to be updated as well. Your Class D, generally speaking, you're getting older and more tired and worn out, and fewer amenities as well. You're going to have a shorter remaining economic life for the building, meaning that if it's got a gas-fired boiler, for example, it might be towards the end of its life expectancy. The roof system is towards the end of its life expectancy. Marginal construction quality and condition as well. It's just getting tired and run down. It's definitely on the lower side of the market rents that are out there. This is more like what you'll be looking at to get into. These are the more affordable buildings, and it's a great starting point. So a 24-unit Class B building is valued at $3.6 million. Average bedroom as 2-bedroom rent is $1,100 per month. Gross rents, 24 times 1100 times 12 means you're collecting $316,800 per year. Your GRM, your gross rent multiplier, is 3.6 million divided by the gross rents, 316,800, is 11.36. You do the same calculation with a Class C or D building, where the value is almost half, $1.56 million. Average two-bedroom rent is $900. So you notice that the rent isn't half the price, 50% lower. It's only slightly lower. You take your gross rents of $259,000 and divide that into the purchase price. You have a GRM of 6.02. Your Class CD building, valued at $1.56 million, has a much greater chance of cash flowing positive for you than the Class B building, simply because of the price point versus the rents that you can collect. So what you want to do is you want to start looking at the bare bone entry level. The 10 to 20, 30 apartment buildings are ideal. Stay away from the elevators, no parking garages, no balconies. It's definitely going to be in the 30 plus years category, and you're looking at a C or D class building. So this building here is a 12-unit building. It's been well maintained, in really good condition. And because it's in good condition, I would consider that to be a Class C building. So that's the end of today's module number 2. So I'm going to leave you with a little bit of homework. This is a property that I recently acquired. It was built in 1964. There's certain sections of it were built around that time. It's a wood frame construction building with stucco on the outside and a poured concrete foundation. It's a total of 21 units. The location is in a lower class working neighborhood, very nice neighborhood though. The purchase price, $225,000. It was in extremely rough condition though, so it needed a lot of work to be done to the property. So we invested another $325,000 into repairs and maintenance. The average rents for this property is $675 per month. The GRM in this area is a value of 6. So what your homework is to figure out what is the building value, what is the forced equity, what would you consider the class of this building to be, would you consider this to have been a good deal or a bad deal. So that's it for this module. Hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you do your homework, and I will provide you the answers for these questions at the beginning of module number 3. Until then, take care.